This is the nullbits Snap 75% mechanical keyboard, a custom keyboard that you have to build yourself. This isn't like most mechanical keyboards though. Most mechanical keyboards will have you soldering on a couple of switches, maybe the USB controller, but this keyboard, you just get a bag of parts and a blank PCB, and you have to do it all yourself. Every single component that you see here was hand soldered by yours truly, which took longer than I would have expected, but it was really worth the journey. The biggest appeal of this keyboard is of course in the name, the Snap. This can become a regular keyboard just by putting it together like this, or it can be pulled apart. But you might wonder how that works. See, if you pull it apart, you might notice that one side stops working, but that's not exactly what we want here. So it includes this small little cable, which is identical to a 3-connection aux cable if you did want to get a longer one. I did. And you can just connect the two sides together, and now you have a truly split keyboard, and you can put them wherever you want, put it together, pull it apart, and it'll work just as you expect it to. This was the biggest appeal of the keyboard for me because it really allows you to be a lot more ergonomic with the way you use your keyboard. Another consideration if you're building this is, of course, your keycaps. As you can see here, I had to get a little creative with them, and usually only more expensive higher-end kits will include all of these weird keys you need. I also opted for a split backspace, which most people will not use. I have it set to be backspace and delete, although some people will just have them both be backspace, that way you can hit it faster. Out of the box, this keyboard doesn't come with any feet, so you'll have to get your own. I opted to get these really overkill metal ones that are meant for large laptops, which is why the angles are so extreme. You can also just retract the feet for a small 1 or 2 degree incline, which is what I use most of the time. However, I have a pretty good reason for getting these extreme ones, which I'll tell you about later. One of the most important features of a custom mechanical keyboard is the sound, and this is an interesting case because there's none. It's just PCBs and structural plates. It'll sound different depending on how you build it, but this is what mine sounds like. I built mine with tactiles, specifically Akko's Lavender, because I prefer the feel of tactiles. And I also got these keycaps on Amazon. I believe they are inspired by an official kit, but as you can probably tell by some of the mismatched keys, it is a knockoff. Due to the lack of case, this keyboard produces very different sounds depending on where you type. It also has a very nice underglow effect, which is diffused very well. Like most mechanical keyboards, it uses VIA to customize the keyboard, and you can also load your own firmware onto here, and they provide all of it open source. So it's very easy to change your RGB profiles or make any effect you really want. I have a lot on here, but I just prefer this slow rainbow effect. I prefer the look of it when it's split personally. I think it looks very nice. With the software you can change the hue of colors very easily on the fly, so I have a couple of keybind setups, that way I can produce any color or effect I want based on a couple of simple ones like a gradient, an RGB effect, and solid colors. It also has a very nice breathing profile, but this is all to the credit of VIA, not the keyboard necessarily. The basic anatomy of the keyboard is a PCB layer, an acrylic layer in the middle for diffusion and structure, and another PCB plate on top of that all your components actually go onto. There's also an optional plate, which I would highly recommend as it makes the process much easier and improves the sound. There's also an acrylic protective layer that's mounted on standoffs up at the front, which is also optional but highly recommended. This keyboard also features dual controllers, so that way you can use either half of the keyboard at a time. And in theory, you could also plug them both in independently to not have a cable running between them, if that's what you want. I also just like this feature because you can just plug it into whichever end is convenient, and you can also technically have different firmware and settings on each half, although they do kind of interact weirdly if you do that in some cases, so it's not necessarily recommended. I do personally, because it allows you to have more storage and hotkeys than you're normally able to on just one. The reason I bought those overbuilt feet was that way you can put it up at this extreme angle. I would never actually use it like this because I find it extremely uncomfortable. However, if you're trying to display your keyboard on your desk or even on a shelf, it makes it much easier to do so. It looks much more attractive at this extreme angle, and now you don't have to buy a shelf for the extra $1 or $2 it costs to get these better feet. It also sounds a lot better like this, but I'd probably never use it in this configuration.